Hi there, and welcome back. This is Thinking Out Loud. My name is Sheldon McLeod, and this is presented to you here exclusively on the Saltwire Network. And we know it's been a rough few days for many people. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians are struggling to get their lives back together after the storm system that moved through on the weekend. In fact, a number of military personnel, additional numbers of military personnel have been brought in to help out, specifically in Cape Breton. But we're not without our own challenges in other communities, as the municipality of Halifax put out some information on Tuesday afternoon. I suspect there'll be some further updates. Schools have been closed for the most part for the last number of days because of, for the most part, power outages. Over 104,000 customers still without electricity. He is the mayor for Halifax Regional Municipality, and Mayor Mike Savage joins us here this morning. Good day to you, Mayor. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Doing well. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. We were, for the most part, untouched by this storm system other than the high winds, and our power stayed on. Your power was out for a time?
Yeah, we got our power back last night, so that would have been Tuesday afternoon. I got word that the power was back on.
Now, municipal services should be up and running for the most part today, Wednesday. I'm curious to know how the services, how you were able to communicate through this storm system. A lot of concern over cell phone coverage, a lot of concern over even landlines not being accessible for some. So how were you able to navigate that?
Well, certainly the communications was a big issue, and you can imagine so many people waking up on Saturday morning, and the first thing they do is look at their homes to see what kind of damage in their properties, and then they start trying to connect with people. And I think for a lot of people it was discouraging that they could not do that. In terms of our key workers, they all had other ways of communicating, and so I don't think it hindered us very much. Our roads crew, obviously police and fire and everybody else, they were up going as soon as they possibly could very early on Saturday. But I certainly share the frustration of people that in 2022, we expect to be able to communicate with each other. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have. And so that's certainly something that I know is going to get a lot of attention, and I expect that we'll see improvements in that area.
Now, just to dig a little further into that, were you communicating through a portable radio? Were you communicating through your cell phone? Was that working for you, or did you have to make other plans?
Well, I went into the Emergency Operations Center early on Saturday, probably by 7:30 in the morning or so. And once I got there, I was able to communicate. It was still difficult. I couldn't communicate with my family at home, for example, because they didn't have power and the communications was extremely spotty, as everybody knows. But once I got to the EOC, I was able to get on their local Wi-Fi systems, and also spend some time with Erica Fleck, who is our amazing EOC, Emergency Operations Center coordinator, and was able to make the contacts that I need to make. And, throughout the day on Saturday, probably did, maybe 12 or 15 interviews locally, internationally as well. And so we were able to get done, what we needed to get done.
Clearly, Cape Breton Regional Municipality has been getting help from the Canadian military. Have you spoken with the Prime Minister? Have you asked for military support to help clear the streets of Halifax?
That would be something that the provincial government has done. I've certainly spoken to I've not spoken to the Prime Minister, but I've certainly spoken to a number of ministers in charge of infrastructure and infrastructure-related issues. And of course, with provincial government, John Laura was at the EOC on Saturday. Steve Craig was there. I had contact with Minister McFarland about the homeless issue. So we were able to touch base with the people that we needed to, and obviously the feds have responded in kind. The Prime Minister's already been here, and the Premier and others have been around to see the damage as well. I've certainly had a chance to get around HRM and see it. So look, we obviously will want some assistance, but certainly, as I'm sure is the case with you, when you see a house washed out to sea in Port aux Basques, and you see the kind of damage that happened in places like Glace Bay and other parts of Cape Breton, northern Nova Scotia, PEI, they need help more than we needed at this point in time. And so that's where people need to put their resource.
Are you satisfied with the pace of the restoration? Some folks, obviously, who were less affected. I'm not in a position to judge because my power didn't go out. But if you've been 4 days without, the ability to live in your own home with electricity, I'm sure you're quite frustrated. Are you satisfied with the pace so far?
I think generally, yeah. I think, Nova Scotia Power are at our Emergency Operations Center. They have their own kind of war room set up, but they had people at the EOC. And it's a difficult time for any utility when you have a storm. I remember after Hurricane Juan, we were without power for a long time. I remember community barbecues in our street back after that one. Hurricane Dorian, similarly. Nobody wants to go home to a house without power, and nobody wants to wake up to a home without power. And as I say, we lost our power Friday night. We got it back on Tuesday. That's frustrating, but I think we have to understand how many people were working on behalf of the power utility to get power back on. And I commend the folks who were up in, buckets, just as I do the people who were working for the city who did an amazing job on the trees that were down on the streets in Halifax. We didn't get hit as hard, but we got hit, and we got hit hard. And we had a lot of trees down, a lot of damage. I've seen some of these massive, mature trees that have come down, landed on power lines, but also in some cases on houses. I think that the work that's been done has been pretty good by our works people, and I think that Nova Scotia Power did a good job of communicating as much as they could during the circumstances and getting the work done.
We have obviously learned lessons from previous storm systems, like, as you referred to, Juan. Hurricane Dorian was the most recent to have a dramatic impact on the infrastructure. And I'm sure you hear, as I do, people who are critical, who say, not enough was done. On the other hand, people who downplay any warning that say, well, this is just hype. This is just, blowing things out of proportion. They're trying to scare people into going out and buy groceries or get their storm chips. When do you have an appropriate time to sit back and say, okay, here's what we would like to see improved. Here's what we think worked well. Here's what we think failed utterly. When is that time?
Well, it won't take very long. One of the things about being at the Emergency Operations Center, they tell you, is don't throw anything out. Keep all your notes. I keep some pretty scribbly notes, and we kept everything because it's going to be gone through to look and, time by time to see how things happened. Overall, I think our folks did an amazing job. I think, there's things in the case, for example, of people who were unhoused who were in encampments. We sent out buses, we sent out taxis. We tried to take care of people's possessions. We brought them to a warm place, make sure that they had food and comfort. And then we, as they wished, brought them back to their encampments. In some cases, I know that our folks had even arranged with the SPCA for animals that needed to be sheltered for people who are unhoused. That provides great comfort to people who are unhoused. And yeah, we learned some things from last time. I know from talking to our folks that in terms of provisions and what we're going to need, food for those who don't get food. So I think, I remember doing the press conference on last Thursday, and we talked about some of the preparations. And yeah, it's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And we will learn some things this time. There's some specific things that I know our folks didn't really expect, but adjusted to during the height of the storm and adjusted very well. And perhaps next time we'll be better able to do that. Food, for example, we now have food trucks that we sent out to Dartmouth North as well as to Spryfield, which we contracted. That was all done on very short notice, working with private contractors to get that stuff done. So, you can plan for a lot of it, but as you see anywhere, when you go through something like this, there are some things that aren't expected and you just have to react.
I know the council session was postponed because of power outages and other issues, but a few of the stories that are coming up, and you touched on the homelessness, but the Affordable Housing Initiative, and I know the United Way is looking towards discussing or opening the conversation about community land trusts. I'm curious as to your thoughts on whether that is an appropriate piece of this puzzle and how far or quickly can that be put in place.
Well, one of the first things when I became mayor was we set up the Affordable Housing and Homelessness commission with the United Way, with providers, with private sector. And so community land trusts have been discussed there. There's other places that do those kind of things. Vancouver comes to mind. And I think that those are an option. I think one of the things that we have to look at in terms of housing is land that's owned by the three orders of government, and how do we access it? Obviously, we're doing that. We've given some of our land in Dartmouth North to the Affordable Housing Association. We're using, obviously, parks for people who simply cannot accept any other kind of accommodation, don't want to go under a roof. So community land trusts are another way of being creative in terms of making sure that we have housing, and particularly housing that's affordable.
And the other agenda item that some of my colleagues are zoning in on, the Mill Cove Ferry. That was a big announcement about helping move people around outside of the main arteries, around the streets, getting people off of the streets and into another form of transportation. Budget estimates gone from 120 million in 2020 to 288 million now. Is this moving to a point where it's possibly not going to happen?
Well, I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to downscale some of the project. At the end of the day, I think that all of our transportation, public transit links, buses and ferries are really important to us, and that we have to, as much as we can, go forward with them, recognizing that everything in the world is gone up, and nothing's gone up as much as sort of building costs, construction costs, materials. So we're going to have to adjust to that. I still think that we need to make sure that as we look at those transportation links, new ones, as would be the case in Mill Cove, that they're cost effective, but recognize that we also have an obligation and a duty to the environment, and that there will be some payback over the years on those as well.
Friday, September 30th, Orange Shirt Day, Treaty Day the next day. Mayor Savage, I'm wondering where you're going to be and whether this hurricane system has impacted your schedule for that.
Yeah, I think it has, because some events for the 30th have been changed. We'll be raising a flag here regardless on Friday, and hopefully we'll see some people in honor of that. There are a lot of people for whom it is a holiday, but it's a holiday with a reason and a purpose, and I hope that people don't just take the day and not give it any thought. So we have that. Treaty Day is normally the 1st. There'll be a few things around that, but a lot of that has been moved to the 3rd. And so, yeah, both of those events are important. Treaty Day is historic in this province, October the 1st. Ron Wallace, the mayor of Halifax, was one of the first politicians in Atlantic Canada to recognize the importance of Mi'kmaq here. And my father, when he became premier in 1993, I think with Chief Syllaboy at the time, Ben Syllaboy, proclaimed Mi'kmaq History Month. So those are important occasions for me. I think they should be for the whole city.
And final question. This was something that just came up in a casual conversation one time. Your last name is Savage. That origin is English, I believe, British. And I'm wondering if that's a concern given the connotation these days. I'm not suggesting your name should change, but just whether this is something that's crossed your mind.
It has. When we moved the motion to take down the statue of Edward Cornwallis, I spoke at council to the fact that when I was a kid, we played cowboys and Indians, and like a lot of other kids growing up in the 70s, and nobody wanted to be the Indians. We wanted to be the cowboys. They were the heroes to folks, little boys like me back in the day. And because my last name was Savage, people meaning to be sort of hurtful or disparaging would say, well, you're a savage. So, we've come a long way. We've learned a lot. And, I think we have to be recognizing as much as we can how language and words can have a negative impact on people. When Dan Paul wrote the book, We Are Not the Savages, my father went to the book launch, something of which Dr. Paul is forever grateful. And, my father whispered to him, some of us are savages, and he kind of laughed about that. So I think, it's something that hits me very personally and deeply, the fact that I don't think that as a country we have fully come to terms, individually as well as collectively, with the First Nations of this land. Here, certainly the Mi'kmaq. I remember the books that I studied from. I was a history guy. It did use the word savages, and it was meant to be disparaging. So it's something I do reflect on. Yeah. Thank you for asking me that.
Well, Your Worship, I wish you well. I hope things come together quite quickly as we get through the next few days into the next possibly few weeks with the cleanup. I really appreciate you taking some time to speak with me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad we still have the opportunity. Thank you very much.